Now, for Arran, okay, this is extending the list a lot. So here are my 3 towns: Arundel, the heritage town; Bognor and Littlehampton, both traditional seaside resorts. And you can see Arundel comes far higher up the list than either of Bognor or Littlehampton. And then if you look at the profile of people saying that they like Arundel, this is using a segmentation model called the Arcleisure model, which was developed actually originally by the British Tourism Agency, but to really find, just to sort of look more closely at the the different types of things that different sort of people like. And it categorizes people into 8 different segments. Okay, you can see them all on there: cosmopolitans, discoverers, traditionals, etc. And the dividing line between the two really is that some people are independent orientated. So cosmopolitans, traditionals, functionals are independent orientated. Other people are more brand orientated, high street style hounds followers. I can tell you, if we did the survey on this audience now, 90% would be in the independent orientated category. And that's the same of visitors to heritage towns and cities. Every heritage towns and cities, you will find that the visitors are biased towards people who are of an independent disposition. And that's one of the reasons why independent businesses thrive in those sorts of places. And you can see that for Arundel. So Arundel is tremendously popular with traditionals who like things like nice traditional pubs and nice antique shops and things like that. But more importantly, cosmopolitans who also like things like smart shops, top quality restaurants and things like that, and are by far the biggest spenders. I mean, cosmopolitans actually spend about more than 1/3 of all the money that's spent on tourism in the UK. So that's why a heritage place has got so much power as an economic driver, because it has appeal to those big spending people. Now, Arundel, and I wasn't very popular with people in Arundel because basically it's a lovely heritage town, very, very popular. But look at it. I mean, and this is so true, isn't it, of heritage places? It's really being neglected. Look at all that ghastly tarmac and, how sympathetically the townscape is treated. And by contrast, almost any town of that sort, in like Holland or Denmark or like that, looks like this, and how much more effectively the heritage environment is used for the benefit of the town. Here's the main shopping street in Arundel. It's dreadful. By contrast to a similar sort of town in Germany. And this is basically what I said to my friends in Arundel. You've got to get your act sorted out, really. It's not good enough. But looking at this more deeper, basically every single town and city, and I'm talking like worldwide, whether it be Cairo or whether it be London or whether it be Kilkenny, is made up of a mosaic of different experiences where businesses and organizations of different sort cluster. And they cluster to do it really for 2 reasons. One, because the nature of the property suits their needs, but also because they're trying to attract like-minded customers. And Brighton happens to be a brilliant example of this. And we've developed a model for sort of looking at this. We call it our place-making mosaic. And essentially, things that are on the left-hand side of the model are experiences which are dominated by multiples. Branded companies, the property tends to be in the ownership of pension funds and big companies. The businesses that operate there tend to be multiples. By contrast, on the right-hand side of our model, the property tends to be in the ownership of independent people, tend to be in multiple ownership. The businesses operating there tend to be independently owned. Cultural organizations and non-profit making organizations tend to exist in those sorts of places. Now, if you look at Brighton is quite convenient for analysing this because it divides neatly in half. So on the west hand, that's North Street, that sort of black line going from north to the seafront up to the station. To the west of it, you've got the sort of mid-20th century High Street, Western Road, and big 80s built indoor shopping centre, Churchill Square. And except on the margins, almost all the occupiers there are branded multiples. Okay, the sorts that you'll see actually in most of the towns and cities in Ireland. Those little dots, by the way, are listed buildings. So on the eastern side of that line, where you've got much more listed buildings, all the businesses there, nearly, I'm probably exaggerating slightly, but most of the businesses there are independently owned. The property's in independent ownership. There are some niche multiples there, but higher fashion sort of brands, and ones that deliberately like to be in a slightly different sort of place because it kind of fits with their brand values. So if you put that on our model, okay, you have this clear pattern, and you see this often. It's common, whether it be the West End of London or whether it be a small town, you see this pattern with the independents clustered together and the multiples clustered together. It's interesting looking at the nature of those businesses. So in the blue area, the high street area, you have a smaller number of businesses. They're obviously bigger businesses. And you get the odd Starbucks and McDonald's, but on the whole, you don't get much by way of leisure. By contrast, in the heritage area, much larger number of businesses and a much larger number of restaurants, bars, and that sort of facility. And really, that is also typical. Restaurants and bars and leisure facilities do not tend to exist in areas where multiples are. And that's because people like those type of facilities in historic environments. They like the character and the property is suited to them. And that's why we call areas which are dominated by historic townscapes and that sort of businesses as oases. And the reason why Brighton has become so popular is because it's brilliantly successful in making the most of its heritage environments to create that mix of retail and leisure in an independent sort of way. And this is exactly the sort of thing which my friends in Arundel need to be doing. You say, well, Brighton's special, what about our normal sort of place? Well, if you look at Stockport, which is a Victorian, post-industrial town just outside Manchester, where they've been regenerating the historic core called the Underbanks, and it's exactly the same sort of effect. We interviewed 200 people there to ask them, what they like about the area, and I think like 199 of them basically said, we like it for the ambience. This is the part of town that we like being in, really. This is just proof of that, the basic thing, there's something in the human instinct that likes the character of heritage environments. It's much the same in Boston, a little market town in Lincolnshire, where I did some work on, where basically you've got these heritage environments, which are dominated by independent businesses. Then you've got the high street multiples in a new development. And in that situation, they had a new council elected there. They had a scheme to invest in the market square, which is fantastic resource, but like in Arundel, is in a really bad state, really. And the council was wavering about whether they should do this or not. And I said, you have to do it. I mean, there's absolutely no question that in a situation like this, the whole future prosperity and sustainability of the town centre all depends on investment in the historic environment and making the most of the historic environment. If they don't do it, there's really no sustainable future for that town. So here are the conclusions, really. The great thing about historic environments is that they are what encourages distinctive and unique businesses and allows them to thrive. And you very, very seldom see that happening in new constructions. They are absolutely essential in terms of creating these oases in which basically there's a mixture of leisure and retail. And that is really very central because that's where people socialize and people mix. And so it's all about the social interaction of towns and cities. And as the examples show around the place, and the best of them are right in the West End of London, but there are examples all over, with imaginative development and imaginative attitude that goes a little bit beyond the normal thing, you can really achieve outstanding results, and actually private sector developers can actually make good profits. So that's why I say every town and city, without exception, really has to look at its historic environments, understand what it's got, and really have a plan to make the most of those historic environments. So just lastly, I had a chance a couple of months ago to spend a day down in Limerick with Roger, my colleague, really, and with stakeholders, and went just to have a look at it. And Limerick is a classic sort of situation, isn't it, for it's not a mid-sized town, but a sort of mid-sized city, I suppose, where you've got this mosaic pattern, exactly as I've just described, but as is often the case in city centres that aren't prospering, most of the offer is below the halfway line in our model, which means basically it's only appealing to a section of the population, and not the section of the population that has money. They are spending their money elsewhere in the out-of-town shopping centres and stuff like that. So Limerick, like most places like this, has to get a broader commercial offer across the city centre if it is going to have a sustainable, viable future, really. And just like in Boston and Lincolnshire, it is all about ultimately making the most of its heritage assets. There's natural heritage and its built heritage. And It's got to improve the quality of its high street retail offer. That is also an essential element, and it's got to sort out the heart of the city to do that. But ultimately, to really become a desirable and attractive city, it's got to make use of its riverside setting, which is fantastic, could be brilliant, and just in Arundel is completely ignored at the minute. So it needs a long-term plan to really do something fantastic with that riverfront. And similarly, it's got to take O'Connell Street, which could be the finest street in Ireland, and really make that work into the finest street in Ireland. And over 20 years, that needs to be its strategy, really, if it's going to regenerate and truly become a successful city centre. And really, it's a typical case where only investment and improvement of its heritage environments can ensure that it really does have a successful future. Thank you very much.